So we're going to talk about influencer marketing. In my own career, I've worked as an influencer, but what I've really enjoyed is working with influencers. And so part of the reason that influencer marketing is one of the hottest things right now in marketing, especially digital marketing, where it's changing. But wanted to talk a little bit about the why. And I mean, these are things that obviously I think most of us know, especially if we work for agencies at all. You know most of this, but I've heard this several times today. People simply trust people more than brands. A lot of stats out right now that Gen Z people trust Gen Z. That age group trusts influencers more than celebrities. It's more authentic. I can tell you from being in a lead gen role for a big chunk of my career that it's proven out with higher quality leads. And then you can leverage social in a way that better fits your brand and reach an audience you would not have reached otherwise, which is always extremely important. And obviously higher engagement, because nobody likes brand content in general. They want to hear from people. One of the most interesting things, I don't know if you've heard this from different studies, is that several studies have come out that showed that for the Gen Z crowd in particular, the number one profession that people aspire to be in Gen Z right now is a doctor. Number two is an influencer, which is kind of scary. And for most influencers, it's creating a different path, but there's obviously a lot of hurdles. I know I heard the video guy, Dub, mentioned earlier, is influencer marketing still working. The market will tell you that it is still working, and it's projected to surpass 10 billion next year, which is ridiculous when you consider the amount of money that was non-existent just a few years ago. But influencer marketing has been around for a long, long time. I know that you can read 50 different places tell you that it started with Benjamin Franklin and a lot of different publications. But there also have been a huge number of new platforms and agencies in the market. I've worked with a select group of few. I've had a few that have approached me that I've worked with over the years. But there's a ton of agencies. It's as hot as digital marketing agencies that sprouted up everywhere across the country in the last 10, 15 years. The same thing's happening with influencer marketing. One of the really, really interesting things to me, though, that I'm trying to figure out now, you'll hear me talk about this later. My nickname is Shark. It has been since a little kid, so I'm going to apologize the fact that I was looking at Shark t-shirts on Amazon. That's how I got retargeted with this. But I'm a diver and I swim with sharks. I generally tried to go yesterday to the Shed Aquarium and didn't get a chance to go, but they need more sharks. It's just my only criticism of Shed. I went last year. But Amazon is really getting heavily into this space, and having competed against Amazon, and that's another thing I wish we talked about on our digital strategy, is having an Amazon strategy. But one of the really interesting things that I worked for TruGreen 6 months ago. I worked for the largest lawn care provider in the country, which has a huge market in Illinois. And Amazon has gotten into the services industry, and they stick their toe in a lot of different waters. Now they're starting to do it with influencer, and I think it's really amazing because for so many people, this comes up a lot, and it's part of the topic we're going to talk about. It's not, my affinity for shark socks or shoes or stuff, which I didn't wear those shoes for a change. And I apologize, I left Think Influencer on there, but the fact that they're now sticking their toe a little more, not just with influencer marketing as a source, they're not a tap influence, for example, but I can see the market moving that way because they are the source for everything else e-commerce. But the fact that they're actually starting to leverage influencers a lot more than they used to help hype and move products, I just think is something that we need to think about a lot. So one of the things I'll talk about real quick is the size of your influencer. And Tom Fishburne, who's the guy that does the Marketoonis, I love this one. Not every brand can afford a Kardashian for influencer marketing. And obviously, sort of I don't know if it's not a gold standard, it's a weird gold standard. It'd be Kylie Jenner, obviously, and that whole family kind of sets the bar at a ridiculous level with number of followers and the amount of money, but that's not for 99.9% of the brands. And I think it unfortunately gives influencers a really bad name, if you will, with where they are in the market despite the fact that a lot of them want to go after that kind of size of audience. One of the people that's going to speak tomorrow, and it's the reason I had her picture on there, is the second person. Her name is Jen Morella. I talk about who are the influencers, whether it's Kylie Jenner. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the little boy, Ryan Tubery. I think Ryan, that's not his last name. It's I forget his name, Ryan Jacquia, but he does Ryan's Toy Review. And if you have children at all, this kid is making more money. He's in the top 5 influencers now. I think Forbes said he made his family made close to 20 million. They have their own TV show now. One of the things that's just amazing is this kid is 7 or 8 years old. He reviews toys online, and now Walmart has him. They're actually doing a toy line. And I have a toddler, and my toddler lives and breathes by this stuff because he knows exactly who this kid is, and he knows the type of toys that this kid's reviewing, but they are making a ridiculous amount of money on YouTube, now with Walmart. I have not checked him out on Twitter. I hope he's not on Twitter, but this is the kind of influencer that has real influence. Another, though, I brought up, and I just added it in, is Nextdoor. Because Nextdoor, if you know the Nextdoor app, it is not that, I don't put anything bad on Twitter, but Twitter has been known to have some nasty commentary on there. I'm sure you've all heard. Nextdoor, if you're a big brand, it is that on 10 steroids. Nextdoor, people go after any kind of big brand times 10, and having worked for a brand that has worked with Nextdoor, to see the commentary, and it's not Nextdoor's fault, it's the commentary. They love going after the 800-pound gorilla in these different geo markets, whatever it is. And it's why a lot of people are being told to think smaller, think local, use influencers, use more nano type or micro influencers. But really, when you think of an influencer and who's influencing you to do a sale, it's not just a Kardashian or the social girl traveler or a 7-year-old who's got his own YouTube channel. It's your neighbor next door. But unfortunately, a lot of people still aren't looking enough at that because they expect it to be some sort of B celebrity, and they want to go after somebody that has 1 million followers. And that's not, for somebody that's worked with a lot of brands that's used influencers, I can just tell you, you don't need somebody with that large of a following. It really matters, though, with your brand what the size is, too. If you are a large brand, one of the things that larger brands tend to go after a larger, and I haven't really quite figured this out in conversations with a lot of them, but a lot of your more nimble brands tend to be able to engage multiple different influencers. And my opinion is you should have 100 Chihuahuas and not one Great Dane. That also helps you avoid the kind of problems when the larger influencer gets booted out of L'Oreal like Kendall Jenner did several years ago, when it was a news story, I think back in 2017. They brought her on to endorse, we were talking about this earlier, a mature skincare cream for women. And when you're 19 years old and look the way she does, you're not really worried about wrinkles. So that became a story in the news for those that follow advertising and influencer marketing. That became a story. Now, most people in here probably haven't heard of it, so it wasn't that big of a scandal. But it also shows you then you got to go replace her with whom? Who do you replace her with that is a better resource? And so working with a lot of micro influencers that have that add up to that market also allows you to have a little bit more refined reach, if you will, with their audience. So Instagram and YouTube, those are the 2 main channels. We know that. I mean, LinkedIn's emerging. That's been one of the ones where I've made some money as well over the years. But Instagram and YouTube and Pinterest, really, Pinterest is one of the ones. We're going to talk to a lady that's a friend of mine here in a minute. Just so you'll understand the tiers, this is put out by Media Kicks, and I thought it was a pretty good little graphic for looking at it. But really, to me, your micro-influencers and nano are where the money is. I can just tell you from my own experience. Some questions you got to ask, and we're going to talk about this as well, is does your channel reflect their audience? And this comes up all the time. Everybody that does know that Instagram and YouTube tend to think that whatever your product is, that's the market where you should go market. You should find an influencer and you're going to hit them on Instagram. It might be that your audience lives and breathes on Twitter, or Facebook or whatever, especially Facebook if you have a more mature audience. That's not going to fit necessarily in Instagram, and the engagement's completely different. Those are the kind of questions you need to ask is, does your audience reflect the kind of people that are on those channels? And you can look at a lot of different demographics data on Snapchat, which is one age group generally, one Twitter, which has more diversity, things like that. There are different markets that you really have to take into consideration, especially if it's any kind of home services, if you've got a healthcare type product, if it's travel. I mean, these are the kind of things you have to start thinking of. Creative vision, we're going to talk about a little bit with my friend Kylie as well, but creative vision, I can tell you, is one of the most important things you can do to use an influencer correctly. So many people try to get their marketing and PR teams, which I'm part of now, with a company, but they try to dictate too much of that conversation. There's approved legal and there's approved standards that you need to set with an influencer, but if you don't have them helping drive a significant chunk of that conversation, it will hurt your campaign, because then it sounds like brand babble bullshit, pardon the French, to their audience, and that's what you have to avoid. But so many companies make mistakes because they want to have, especially their PR communications team, or just you, since you're the solo person, your marketing team, if part of you says, you want to control this, just understand that they need to help drive that kind of creative vision with you. For content marketers out there, I'm such a proponent of influencers being part of your storytellers. If you want somebody else to, as a third party, to validate, and I don't mean third party in the sense like you're putting out positive stuff on Yelp or somewhere else, have them engaged in your storytelling conversations. If you know what your content strategy is, which for a lot of people they are amiss with that, help them drive that part of the story. Guardrails, again, this is one of the most important things that I find all the time that people have problems with, is they don't establish product guidelines. They don't figure out who's creating the content. A lot of times, like I said, the brand wants to try to create it. That doesn't mean that you let your your influencer go wild with creative content. It just means establish what they can and cannot do, and then let them run with it. Don't stage. I mean, authentic's another one of those words that's a drinking game word. Every time we hear authentic at a marketing conference, that comes up. But you cannot stage. That's why video, as he was saying earlier, you can't put somebody in a room and it be perfectly clean. It should look like another person, any other person's room. Bad analogy, but it's got to look like it's really theirs. Influencers should look like an actual customer. This is a problem. I find a lot of people and brands that I've worked with over the years want to take an influencer because they love the idea of influencer marketing, but then they get, and I'm going to borrow this phrase and attribute this to him, but he probably won't like this, but Rand Fishkin was joking with me. He said it calls it half-naked girls on Instagram. If your audience is a mature audience that is buying, bathtub for elders on Facebook, they're not going to resonate necessarily with a 22-year-old who's might be that kind of influencer. And unfortunately, people rush to put money in influencer marketing and don't know where to go, and then some reason still find the wrong kind of person. Kind of going back to my Kendall, now I'm saying this up on stage, I can't remember if it was Kendall or Kylie Jenner, but it was one of the two, the one I showed you earlier. Tag the hell out of everything. As he mentioned, UTM tagging, that is such a big deal. You've got to be able to do that from an attribution standpoint. Otherwise, you're typically, and this comes up a lot, unfortunately giving money to help an influencer build out their channel. You're not in this business to help any influencer build up their channel. You're in this market to help you drive business, get more engagement, whatever, for your brand or your agency, and determine where the lead's being driven, which is key. Contracts. We're going to talk about this a little bit. This is another thing that drives me crazy because I get a lot of contract proposals in front of me. Things to think about, and this comes up, it actually came up at the last DigiMarcon conference a lot. What are the kind of things that people have to think about? And this oddly enough comes up a lot because we don't think about it. This is not like you've got a standard contract for most people. For influencers, it is the wild, wild west out there. Most of the people are not, these are people that are not from legal teams that, automatically use some standard contract that comes from LegalZoom. The contracts are all over the place. I've gotten so many different contracts. I know Kylie and Kaylin that are coming up in a minute. They have gotten so many different kind of contracts that they've been pitched to from brands that one would make perfect sense to do this and one would make perfect sense to do that. And that's generally because the agencies that are pitching it to them that are doing the opposite, they don't know enough about influencer marketing, or they don't know enough about those kind of contracts with those kind of people to really pull those together. Those are the kind of questions you have to start thinking about. Really, I had one from the event in Houston. What's the price per post, content piece? Are they being paid by lead sale? A lady who had just signed an influencer up for a contract, unfortunately, was going to work that out after they agreed to the terms. I don't know how you agree to the terms without knowing what the actual terms are, but that comes up a lot. One of the biggest ones, and this is where I've called BS on a lot of folks, is how do you verify against fraud? That is such a major problem that's such a major problem right now with influencers. And the guy from Dub mentioned it earlier. Influencers, there's obviously a lot of fraud. You can buy a lot of followers. And when you don't see sales coming in, that's one, but there are ways of going through and verifying some of it. You've got to be able to look and see, is their audience really their audience as much as you can? Establish your KPIs. One of the things that came up as well is a lot of people ask, are your relationships with an influencer campaign-based, or are they over a year period or whatever time period you want to use? The great majority, I think several studies I read, it was well north of 80% were all campaign-based. Most people are bringing somebody in for a campaign, not for a season or for a year. You may be different. It may be different if you have a seasonal brand and you need to bring somebody in your campaign base may be over a longer period, or maybe it's part of a ongoing story that you're trying to tell. It just depends to you. Pros and cons, like I said, it's the Wild West. 99.99% of them are not lawyers unless you're looking for a legal influencer. They are not going to be some of them are very smart, and some of them are not. Some of them aren't legal experts who are going to know, so you've got to help guide them through that process, because really the onus falls back on you as the agency or the brand. It's not going to fall back on them. They are strictly a contract employee, if you will, doing a service for you. So I always bring this up, though. If you remember the Kendall Jenner egg, or was that Kylie? Just now, it's got me bamboozled. This is what having ADHD is like. Influencers drove this to happen when this broke the world record for most Instagram likes and shares, and it just showed the power of community where influencers can make major lift in this. You're laughing, but do you know if it's Kendall or Kylie? Because I said it earlier. Who remembers if it's Kendall or Kylie? Thank you. I'll go with Kylie until I forget it 2 seconds from now. So does influencer marketing work? I can tell you from having worked with them for a lot of brands, it absolutely does. But I always encourage people to think influence and not influencer. I hope I wrote that. Think less influencer and more influence. It does not matter what size. If you can manage a large group of people with 10 followers as opposed to 10,000. If those people with 10 followers drive more sales than the ones with 10,000, then you've hit your money. But the problem is most people don't think of it that way, because we come from an industry where reach is such a massively big deal to us that it sounds great when you look strictly at the number of followers, and it's one of the dumbest fallacies that marketers make all the time. As I said, I talked a little bit about fraud, but I can just tell you about the amount of ones that if they just get a bunch of likes because they got 100,000 followers, that means nothing if they haven't driven what you need for your brand, for your product or service. So at this time, you're going to hear me babble about this a lot. That's not the intention of this. I do a podcast called A Shark's Perspective, and I actually interview a lot of the influencers in marketing, including several, actually the two that we're going to talk to today. And I'm going to pray and hope this works correctly. Now that I got this off, this is Okay. So the first person we're going to talk to is Kylie Francis, who is a friend of mine. This worked 2 weeks ago, and that's what we were trying to test out up here. So it should work.
On Pinterest, like I wasn't an influencer at the time. I don't even think the term influencer even existed. But long story short, I became obsessed with Pinterest, and that was my outfit for pinning fashion articles. And what I did was I started monetizing my Pinterest through affiliate marketing. And that has led me for the last 8 years to become a full-time six-figure influencer on Pinterest alone. And because Pinterest is a search engine, I've used Pinterest to grow my Facebook group that I now educate online entrepreneurs with when it comes to social media marketing. And I also use Pinterest to grow my Instagram following, which is just more so, I like to think of Instagram as the online business card. So I just use Pinterest so my clients can get to know, like, and trust me, and it builds the know, like, and trust factor. So now I have a following of about 132,000 followers. And one of my passions now is teaching online entrepreneurs how to establish their personal brand and make it profitable, specifically on search engines. So it becomes on autopilot and they can create passive income.
Yep. So perfect. So Kylie works with a lot of brands. And one of the questions I wanted to kind of throw out there for you is, and I just for sake of time and everything else, if you could give advice to a group of digital marketers, we've got a lot of people here from brands, a lot of people from agencies. You and I've had this conversation. To me, she's a representative, to be honest, of the best answers that I've gotten when asking sort of this question. So that was one of the reasons I wanted to pull Kylie in to speak with everybody today. But if you could give advice to a group of marketers, what would the advice be on how to best work with you as an influencer?
Well, I think the first thing is that everyone like darts to Instagram. So the problem with Instagram is that everyone and their mom really wants to be an influencer. And these days, it's so easy for somebody to just pay for likes, pay for followers, pay for comments. And it's really misleading to a lot of brands and marketers because they go and look at these profiles and these influencers seem like legitimate influencers, but in reality, they have no idea of what they're doing. So they're kind of just like, it's really easy to throw your money in the trash when working with influencers just by looking at vanity metrics. So it's really important that when you're looking for an influencer, you really do the background research and make sure that they have an engaged following in your specific niche. That's the most important because that's going to, when you develop a relationship with an influencer, that's going to increase your brand loyalty with new customers because you seem legitimate. And if you're just going to find influencers that don't really, know what they're doing, they bought all and have you, it's going to make it really hard to grow your business by using fake influencers.
Spot on point. It just made me think of another conversation I'd had with somebody who runs for a retail brand. Another thing that to think about, just to piggyback off what she just said, is with Vanity Metrics, people tend to look for a certain engagement rate as well. Let's say for a lot of people, they want at least 10% of an influencer's engagement to get likes, shares, whatever the KPI you're doing. But the same metric you get on Instagram is not the same one you get on Pinterest or Facebook or LinkedIn. So you've got to think about that. LinkedIn in particular. I mean, LinkedIn, for most content you share, brands are getting less than 5%. And so the same thing applies when you look at your engagement across different channels, even that an influencer has. She may get, what is your engagement rate? And I'm sorry, I'm looking at the screen, even though the camera's here, so it's throwing me off. So what is your general engagement rate that you think of for Instagram versus Facebook or Pinterest? How do you sort of look at those differently?
Yeah, it's really hard to tell because so on Instagram, they say that a healthy engagement is between 5 to 10%. And I say the same for Facebook. And I feel like with influencers on both of these platforms, Instagram as of late, everyone probably saw like Instagram is down and like everyone in Facebook groups is complaining about the Instagram algorithm because they keep changing their algorithm to favor less for organic reach because they want to pay for advertising. That goes for Facebook as well. We're the same company. So a healthy engagement on Instagram and Facebook would be between 5 to 10%. And on Pinterest, just between Pinterest and YouTube, these are both search engines. So it takes 3 to 4 weeks to get maximum engagement from a pin or from a video, simply because you have to give it time for people to search for your content.
Perfect. So I'm going to open this up first because we took a lot of time on questions last time. But who has questions? Who wants to know the dark, dirty secrets of influencer life? Just kidding. But does anybody have any questions that they want to ask an influencer so that you can, if you're thinking about influencer campaigns? Anyone? Bueller? That table that was supposed to come up with questions? So much for plants. She's got one. Throw her the box. Okay.
Hello. Okay, so I guess I'm not as familiar with influencers. So, do you get approached by certain brands asking you to do ads for them, or are there certain brands that you specifically want to work with and you reach out to them?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer that, and this is what I teach on my Facebook group, is that you should never reach out to. But
So yeah, you're sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher. Say that again one more time. Kylie, say that again one more time.
oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so was that the end of the question? I couldn't hear that towards the end. Okay, so if I were to reach out to a brand, I don't reach out to brands. I'm a big believer that a lot of businesses should have influencers. Like if you have a digital marketing director in your business, you're selling a product-based business or a service-based business, you should be reaching out to influencers to work with them. Because the problem is that if an influencer were to reach out to you, they're more than likely just going to lie to you just to be like, okay, work with me, these are my metrics, whatever. And a lot of times when I started out as an influencer and I reached out to them, we were like, no, we have, influencer, I guess, I don't want to say influencer marketing employees, but their social marketing teams looking at influencers in their niche. So I don't reach out to brands personally, but I do have just reach out to me almost every single day. And what they do is when they reach out to me, it's either their message or email. But this is another thing, Kenneth, I think that we were going to talk about influencer contracts and how to structure an influencer contract. So it's win for both the influencer and the company. So specific things that you should include in an influencer contract is how much money you're willing to pay the influencer per post for a certain amount of posts over a period of time, which is statistically proven now that in Vanity, you have your influencer for of least years. Because the problem is that if you have a...
Kylie, you're breaking up. Sorry.
Oh. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. To increase brand affinity, to have an influencer at least, I would pay $3. And you want to go off a period of posts per week. Because the problem is that if you were to only do a one-off campaign, there's not going to be a lot of trust between the influencer and the
Good point.
followers, which is the whole point of using an influencer, is to get their followers to purchase the product. But they're not going, it was fishy, kind of just think about it and step back. Like if I was to promote Smart Water for one of my posts and on all of my other posts I'm drinking Fiji, it's kind of like, okay, you actually drink Smart Water. A lot of followers are becoming hesitant into believing influencers if the influencer is starting from one product to the next. So that's another thing you can look at when you're looking at influencers, is making sure that they are, not promoting every single product because they're getting money from it. So going to what you're saying in the influencer contract, you can include if you're a business is the time length, start to end date, what you expect of the influencer, but allow them to, hold the reins of the product or of the content with the product in it, and how much money you're going to spend.
Okay, I'm going to paraphrase something from a conversation because it still broke up a lot.
Sorry,
It's not your fault. It's technical Thursday.
Okay.
So one thing, though, that she said, and it piggybacked off what I was saying earlier, is when you look at it from being campaign-based only, just expect I'm not a proponent of that. It just makes it a much shorter, much lower ROI. So last question, I'm going to paraphrase from our question when you were talking about people approaching you. So how should brands and agencies take it when, because I've heard different stories on this, Kylie. How should they approach it when they are being approached by influencers? Because there are a lot of influencers out there pitching themselves to brands.
Right.
What should their, dialogue at that point be, in your opinion?
Well, I think the first thing to do is look and assess the profile and see, through engagement. We talked about this previously, but there's a company, fohr.co.
Yeah.
It's fohr.co. And they specialize in weeding out the fake influencers versus the real influencers. So what we spoke about earlier was be fooled by Vanity Metrics. So if someone were to message with 200,000 followers, but if you go and click on their post like 20 likes, it means they've got followers. But a lot of businesses don't understand that the influencers are buying likes, they're buying followers, they're buying comments, and you can just simply tell by like a 1 minute overview of somebody's profile. All you have to do is click on the picture and see what type of people are liking it. And if it looks like scammy profiles, it's because they bought their followers' likes and comments. So if an influencer reaches out to you, I wouldn't X them out right away. But what you can do is you can ask for their analytics to see what type of engagement they are getting. Because if they're serious about it, they're going to have a PR kit. Mm-hmm. And if they don't have that, you can simply just take a glance at their profile and see if they're a right fit for you.
Agreed. So any other questions? Yes, sir.
Yeah, this is both for you, Ken, as well as Kylie. I think you both might have a good opinion on this. So how do you identify the right influencer or influencers for your brand or campaign, right? So we are niche business to business, organization. So Kylie, you wouldn't fit for us. But how do you identify through social media, if you are a smaller organization looking for possible influencers to reach out to for your campaigns?
Kylie, you can answer that because you're doing a lot more on LinkedIn right now anyway. So.
Yeah. So I think the biggest thing to think about is knowing what your niche is and what industry you're in. And once you from there, the second thing to know is that not all influencers are on Instagram, okay? They are on LinkedIn, they are on podcasting, they are on YouTube, they are on Pinterest. And I think one thing to take note of is that if you're in a tech business, if you're in education, if you're in anything that needs details for someone to understand what type of business you're in, you're honestly better off going to LinkedIn for podcasting and looking for influencers simply by searching for your niche in the search bar. It's really quite frankly where you start and where you kind of have to go, and you build from there. But I think what a lot of businesses get wrong is that they're kind of okay, I need an influencer for my business, so I'm going to Instagram. And I think that's not the hardest thing you can do. Another thing you can do is that you can also go to Facebook and there's a lot of people and prioritize.
Kylie, hold on. You sound like Charlie Brown's teacher again. Say Facebook and then what you were going to say.
Okay, so Facebook groups. It's like Facebook's newest algorithm that's prioritizing Facebook groups. So for example, I have a Facebook group filled
Very
with
brave.
online entrepreneurs, and there's 600 of them in there. So if someone was selling an online platform and they approached me and they were like, hey, do you want to like flat rate, do a deal, or I can give you a discount code, whatever, I would be like, sure, that makes sense for the people that are in my niche. My followers would like that if I tested out the platform and I liked it. So there's a lot of different ways to go about it, and just know that Instagram is not the answer, and sometimes it's the hardest way to go about influencers, because like the vanity metrics and likes, it's so hard to filter through. Real influencers versus fake people. So know that there are better options if your product or service requires more explanation. So tech, education, digital courses. Yeah. Don't forget about LinkedIn, Facebook groups, podcasting, YouTube, and all that.
Makes no sense. Okay.
May I ask a question?
Yeah, one last question.
Okay, yes. First of all, thanks for joining us. And so I'm glad to be able to talk directly to an influencer. I guess I'm also kind of new to this. What I want to understand is when you are approached by a brand, do you have to authentically be behind the brand? I mean, is this something you would use, something you can speak authentically about? If you absolutely hated the brand, would you turn it down, the offer?
And Kylie, kind of keep that to about a minute or less for time.
Okay, so really quick, I am very ethical when it comes to accepting brand endorsements and what have you. So just because I'm like that doesn't mean that a lot of other influencers are. Mm-hmm. So yes, if brand isn't in alignment with business, and I do different niches across platforms. So if they're not in alignment with something, I would never use if I hate that product. Like for example, I do a lot of CrossFit, and I post a lot of pictures about CrossFit on my Instagram. I do not like Reebok. Sorry if anybody for Reebok is in the stands, but like I love Nike, so I'm not going to promote Reebok. And this actually happened to me. Reebok approached me with a deal, and I was like, your clothing doesn't fit my body type. I can't find this deal, even if you're going to pay me. So yes, I do not just accept any deal that comes my way just because is behind it, and I'm a big believer in not doing every single endorsement that comes your way, because is that your followers aren't going to trust you because I never wear Reebok. So why would I start promoting it? They're going to be like, not you. Right? And the thing is that bigger business is also going to lose in that contract because my followers know that now I'm buying. It's not going to look good for that brand or business either. That's why it's really important that like when you're filtering out influencers, that you're making sure that your brand is also in alignment with their brand. So it doesn't like, don't let their follower count get in the way of brand loyalty, because both parties will lose every single time.
Quick thing, Kylie, you mentioned podcasts. I know we've talked about this for content, but you've done a lot of podcasts. What's your favorite podcast?
Sharks Perspective.
Thank you. All right. So one thing I was going to say in response to you also as well, when you asked her about where to find the right one, especially in B2B. I'm a big proponent personally. I agree with exactly what she said. Just to add to it though, find somebody that's following your brand. If you want to find an ethical influencer like her, find somebody that likes a certain product. Don't find an influencer to put on your product. Find somebody that's either following you or engaging with you, I'm a fan of curating an influencer, if you will, or finding one that's already got an affinity for my brand and then putting that on steroids, not just taking someone and dropping it because you want to add an influencer to your campaign. There are people following your brands if you've got a social presence. If they have the right size following, you can really, amplify it and blow it up. So, Kylie, thank you again very much. Apologies for the technical difficulties and the Charlie Brown's teacher, but it was very, very helpful, and everybody give her a big wave.
Thank you.
And I'm going to shut her off. So, again, very appreciative that you guys took the time and held on, and hope that was insightful. So, I'm going to turn it on to the outstanding producer of this show,